Okay, hello, welcome. I'm Bob Curtis Johnson, SummitDay Media is a company. And we're a vendor almost exclusively for Alaska, but we work around the North 48 on different places, and probably got some of the materials in the bag. But if not, there's some on the back table back there. And we're going to talk for an hour about this, and I'm hopefully not going to talk as much. And hopefully you can think of some questions or anything you ever wanted to know, and I'll try to illuminate you if I have an answer. And I'm not quite like Spock here doing a mind meld with the films, but try. That's our goal right there. So, survey set. So we started with a survey about where you might be, what's your interest for being here today, what would you like to know, and is there something I can incorporate it? So would you like to share?
I work here in Fairbanks, at the visitor center, and we have a large film collection that we use for, showing tourists, visitors.
Mhm.
It's in various states of media, so a lot of it is old VHS tapes that we've burned to DVD.
Mhm.
Some of it is 16mm that we burned to a VHS that we then burned to a DVD. Some of it's digital. And so, my interest was kind of piqued in just like what you do, because we have all these weird things that come up and people want to do stuff in our facility, and we'll have different formats and whatnot, and Fairbanks does not really have anybody that knows the
Converts,
space. So
yeah.
yeah, just kind of curious what your area of expertise is and how we can use you.
Okay, great, thank you. And
Similar situation, I'm with a indigenous adult research group, and we have 35, 40 years on video and all media forms, pictures, audio.
Yeah.
All sorts of family that we need to.
all the stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need in one place.
And before I forget to mention this, I do have my materials back in the back. Basically, it's the website. There's a contact form that goes right to my inbox. Again, I'm Bob. You can use Bob at SummitDayMedia.com, or if you have a card, just lay it on the table, and you can reach out afterwards. See, so
What we're doing around the room.
why are you here?
Why am I here? Oh, I'm new to film. I'm a graduate student at UAF, and I just recently decided at the end of August that I wanted to incorporate documentary film into my thesis work, which is more ethnography type work. So I quickly got into some film classes at UAF, and now I'm working in the library and film archives.
With Angie.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is the place to be. Learn more about film archives.
Yep. Good. And
I work at the museum in Nome, and we have probably the same, in every form. And not only to preserve it, but to also make it more accessible. We don't really have old VHS players and especially the film, all that, so.
okay, so for the recording and anyone on the stream, to summarize, some general interest in the topic and just trying to learn about it, and we have stuff we need to start figuring out how to make our way through that in an organized and sensible way, and that fits in really well with the plan for today. Come on in. So survey over, just to get a sense of what, I don't know if it's how visible this is at home, but this is me in 1985 in Anchorage. It was the first, professional post-production facility. And in the room right to my left here was 3 1-inch machines and pneumatic machines and all the formats. And I loved that work so much that I went and did it in Boston and DC. And so this is me, I think 1991. And the studios that we're looking at here literally are like $1 million of equipment in those days to do what you can pretty much do on the phone today at a lower quality. But it was daily working with all of these formats and recording on them and re-recording and understanding how they held up under all that work. So later in life, it made sense to get into preservation work. I'm showing this not to scare anyone. For those at home, this is a listing of materials or video in different formats, digital and analog, that might be in your collections. This is just one organization. This is KYUK TV in Bethel. We're doing a massive project with them to digitize almost 8,000 reels of material, audio and video that they have for their entire collecting and creating history, their broadcast history. But this is the kind of thing why it gets complex. So I'm going to keep trying to make it as easy as I can, but there is some similarity to these different formats. The problem is the machinery. It's not so much that they're aging, getting unplayable. In general, audio and videotapes are pretty good. Depending on how, if they've been out freezing, thawing every winter, maybe it's a problem, but they've been held indoors or are generally okay. The bigger problem is the machinery is getting old and the parts are rare. And if you find a machine locally, it's probably not been touched by an engineer in a long time. And it may be a risk to use it. So that's the bigger thing. When it comes to film, there's more film scanners available today than there was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There's just, and they're better and the quality is improving. So if you keep the film in good shape, the world's your oyster as far as many times as you want to scan it. But video and audio and these complex, maybe these tape-based digital formats, those are where you really need to focus your attention in the short term. This is who we are. I'll just give you a quick glimpse inside. This is one of our digitizing racks. We also have audio, dual audio capture stations for oral history, and a lot of cassettes and 1/4-inch. Gabrielle on the left there, she's working with film and she's inspecting it and inventorying it in our in-house system. Once you scan films, do color grading work to bring the color back. So Ted Stevens, I don't know if that's not very visible here. We've gotten this darkened down a little bit so the folks at home have a chance of seeing something there. But it's basically a software workstation. And once it's digital, you're basically doing that with media once it's digital. Here's a storage, pulling out some tapes. And this is, if you're familiar with audio cassettes, this is a surgery for an audio cassette. Everyone might be familiar with that if you grew up with these things. Oh, yeah. So anyway, thought it was cute. So I'm going to take a moment here and ask everybody to get up and come up here because we're going to do a petting zoo. And the reason I want you to come up here is because I don't want anybody to be concerned about touching media that might be important. So all this stuff is disposable. It's courtesy of Alaska Film Archives here at Rasmussen Library. And the point is just grab it and do something with it. Grab it and poke around that. Yes, come on up.
Boy, do those, some of those look familiar.
Yeah, that's like an overgrown VHS, that one.
Yes,
Here's a real VHS. You have tape-based formats. Look around them on the edges, on the top. Sometimes you'll see the length. See that 64? That's telling you there's 64 minutes of tape on there. And that's useful. And sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. Yeah, they also have little flaps wherever the VHS went. If you see this one right here, has a little button. So you can look in and see what's going on with the tape.
Yeah.
Is it
And you
rainfall?
actually fix things. with a
Yep.
I never knew they made them this big.
I've got a bigger one. It's about as big as this.
Yeah.
It's digital, but they're huge cassettes.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This is a digital Betacam. Betacam was a replacement for Pneumatic because of the weight of that. That's hard to put into a camera,
Oh my God.
and the batteries were heavier back then, so it was just, like camera people were just, I was one of them for a while. And so they kept making the tapes smaller and lighter. And you ended up with like I8 over there, and small digital formats, which are,
Yeah.
you know, right? So that was that, and this is the early days, so this was something I actually used early in my career, but this was a shock, yeah, if you're reasonably have that, just a little sensible, just tiny.
Yeah,
See what's going on there?
that's it.
The density of that, and this is what's television being shipped around, this is called quad or 2-inch. And, hi, I'm gonna show this to the camera, I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
It's 2 inches wide, and it was called quad because there were 4 heads on it, and it went across straight. And this would be like a half-hour program, maybe it's an hour, I'm not sure, but basically you had to load it onto a machine, and because there's so much weight, you had this braking system, you had to torque down the thing to lock it in place, so it didn't go flying off across the room, off the machine. 50s, 60s, yeah, and in Alaska, they were actually being used into the late 90s in Anchorage by the public station.
Yes, I know they were up here.
Uh-huh.
We were friends of mine mounting. Yeah, mounting tape. for those.
KUAC?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so in film, I'm not sure if this is tape down, maybe not, but you're probably familiar with the idea of sprockets. So sprockets, and there'll be a single set or 2 sets. This is probably a distribution print. And if you look at it from the side later on, you'll see the sound stripe here on the side, yep. And that's burned right into it so that you can just put it on a projector and play it easily. But a camera original does not have that most of the time. And so you have like pre-production reels and you have finished films. And they often turn magenta because they were cheap stock for distribution, partly because nobody thought they really had a life for very long, so they worried too much about it. And certain stocks just kind of turn to magenta. And if you got Kodachrome, you're in good shape with stills and film. That stuff just holds up. And there's 8mm this size, 8 Super 8 would fit on this reel. And here's a. And that. And they made the sprockets, so the image area large, that's a Super 8, so they're tiny. On the 8mm, regular 8mm, the sprockets are about the same thickness as the 16mm, same width. Because they used to take 16 and slice it in half. And it's probably 30. I'm not sure. One issue you have with old cans, they rust, and it can be a beast to open up. And that's a real one. And another thing is they hold it so tight. If they start decaying, the gases can build up inside. Cause a real problem. It depends on what it is, because the nitrate will spontaneously ignite, but you can't put it out. It's a bucket of water and you can put it in there and it'll keep burning. So that's a real problem. And most of the nitrate is turned into a puddle of goo and the unstable stuff. And the stable stuff is still around, but you have to.
Are you familiar with the trauma?
I'm very familiar. Yeah,
Do these people know about it?
I'll tell you in a moment. Yeah, because that's
even more.
a lovely story. And I actually have a short interview that I did with Canadian guys who took the lead on that project. I did a little video interview with them because I felt, hey, we just want to document this. And then the guy who made the big film about it was totally recommended. It's called Frozen Time.
We've shown you twice.
It's-
started
it's
signing it.
Bill Morrison.
As a prelude to the, I did nothing I did with Yukon West taking.
Yeah.
And,
He did a great job. Yeah,
Frozen time.
yeah,
I've heard about it, but
You know.
yeah, I have to.
yeah. He does a lot of interesting work. His name's Bill Morrison, does a lot of interesting work with decaying film, decaying nitrate. He scans it and then he makes art films out of it. So that's a more narrative film. But
well, Angie's in,
yeah, she's wonderful locally, and the folks at Alaska Film Archives are a real rotary. And is there anything else you want to play with? This is your chance to not worry about it. You know, I'm just saying it's not gonna break it. And if you're worried about your own collections, that's an issue. these guys are really challenging because they don't play back well, but it's a great new piece of software.
There, yeah.
If you've got a player, yeah. Oh,
I have a player and I've been looking for a place to get it really working again,
Mhm.
because all of my husband's archaeological notes are on his little bookies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All
it's the
right.
last part of his archive that hasn't been transcribed. so-
Yeah, well, we'll help if we can.
Yeah, okay.
A memo, like audio? tape?
Yeah.
Audio, yeah, memo recorders, yeah. Those are real popular in rural Alaska here because without the written language, the elders would send, letters to each other on memo recorders. And then they would record over it and send it back. So you don't always have the history of the conversation
Oh.
in that regard. All right, well, sorry you missed that, you folks at home, but.
No, I was able to get some of that.
Oh, good, good. I saw you working. Yeah, thanks. So I'm just gonna go through some of the key steps when you're doing preservation planning with media, things to be thinking about. What are we gonna do? You gotta select what you're gonna. And I'm gonna just jump in real quick. I don't know how many people are familiar with the term migration versus digitization. Migration is moving content from one carrier to another, So there was a time when, people would take, film, move it to Betacam or 3/4 inch, move it to Betacam, or digital Betacam, and then just straight to files. And you kind of transfer the preservation status of that content from carrier to carrier when you do it in a museum setting. So if you've got a film and you scan it at a high enough resolution and, the intent that it is now the content, you're not going to get rid of your film, but you're going to protect that digital as if it was the only thing. And the same thing would be true of any of these analog sources. Once they're off of here, you get them into a digital file at a proper, capture resolution. That you have to treat that not like it's a playable file. It's the thing you protect. And then you make other derivative files, and those are what you pass around. And they're usually a lot smaller and more compressed, but they're easier to put on the web and that sort of thing. So that's the migration concept of taking that content on a trip, from carrier to carrier. And not all of it gets digitized. Okay, so these digital formats are already digital. So you're gonna migrate, you remove that content onto a file-based system and create a file for it. It's still going to be digital. So you haven't digitized it, it's born digital. So I usually recommend people, so think about this. How at risk is the format that your film is on, whatever it is, video? And what do we think I call it the heritage value of the artifact? How important is this to us versus how at risk is its source? And when you get those two, and you combine it together, you pretty quickly get what I would call a preservation assessment, or this is a priority most likely. If you can't do everything, you can't afford to do everything, we're going to do the highest value assets at most at risk. Start with those. And there's a limited number, 2 or 3 or 4 formats that we almost always start with in any collection. Just because the machines are just dwindling rapidly. And there's other formats like 1/2-inch open. There's a known group. And then you expand from there. And you're probably making a decision based on the label. Well, what if somebody wrote the wrong thing down or on the tape? Maybe it got re-recorded. Maybe this really interesting thing turns out to have TV commercials you don't care about on it or something, or vice versa. What if it says TV commercials and it's an hour and a half of an elder? It's hard to know, and that's the problem. Is they're not human readable. Most of this stuff cannot be determined, by Spock, trying to do the mind meld. At least with a film, you can kind of wind through it and you can visually see what's on it. But with audio and video, you have to play it. And if you don't have a working player, frankly, it's hard enough to make the decisions that almost cost you the same just to digitize it. Because you can push the material through faster and you don't know what you have. And often there's something on there that you might not realize you wanted. And sometimes it's the end of the tape. You know, you see this 20 minutes of something you don't really care about, and then turns out it was over recorded onto something really interesting that just shows up in the last 10 minutes of the tape or something like that. And suddenly you've got something that's highly valuable, very interesting. But it's not on the label at all. So this is these are some of the problems that we'll get into. What we would want and you would want as well is how many total hours are we talking about here? How long is this? You know, how much time? Because that's translates into data. It translates into human labor, time on the machines for capture, and quality control and all that kind of stuff. So part of it is why we were looking at numbers on here. Oh, this is 96 possible. Could be an hour and a half, right? So if you know the formats and you know what you have, you try to get some idea of what's it likely to be if everything on there was fully recorded, and then work backwards from that. So you need a plan. What are our specifications going to be? What do we need for our circumstances? And what are our access formats going to be? Is that something that we as a vendor need to know? Is sort of like, well, what do you want this captured at? And how many derivative files do you want and what flavor? You know, and there's known sets of that, and it's pretty easy to do the access material once you have the files captured. Are you doing it yourselves? You're trying to set up to do that? Do you have a lot of stuff, a little bit of stuff? Does it make sense for us to try to do this internally? Again, estimating, are we going to staff for this? How soon do we need it? Usually there's an exhibit. I would just say, if we get approached in a rush, it's because something's coming up in a month or two. Can we get this film transfer or something? And sometimes it's, okay, we're going to start going after our collection, you know, bit by bit and work through it. But you have to estimate. For grant applications and all of that, you have to have some kind of take this giant thing here and whittle it down to a project, you know. And then you do the work, you inventory everything, you assess the quality, the playability of it. Is this ready to go onto a machine? If we did give it to somebody, is it damaged? And then presuming it is, then you digitize or you migrate the content. And then you check the files that have been created when they're digital. And then those have to go into data storage of some kind. And then you put the originals back in your protected storage. And a lot of people think, hey, can't we throw them out? And the reason you can't, it's like any other archive. Film, when digital first got going, 1K scans, 1,000 pixels on the long dimension, was the thing. People were scanning away. It's like, hey, great, we can put this on VHS and all that. And Hollywood spent millions doing that. And then 2K came out, and then 4K, 6K. Now they're capturing in 8K. It changes. Technology changes. The scans get better. The scanning machines get better. All true for film. For video, there's been incremental, smaller improvements, but it's not been the great leaps that the scanners have taken. So the problem is, again, nobody's making new machines to play audio and video. Risks of inaction. These may sound familiar. No, we're still on the truly warm. Yeah, the machinery is the issue. It's not a huge issue right now, but some of them are. As we talked about, quad machines, just not available. There's one in Anchorage, but it's not in a playable state. And there's probably 6 or 8 places in the US where you can get a quad done quickly, kind of like within a month, you know, but there's not a massive amount. And film labs have gone completely down, like processing film, there, you know, there's hardly any left. And that is not usually the issue for us because we have films that are already processed almost always. Dave's played on I won't say aging machine, how about a machine that's not properly maintained, run the risk of damage. And of course, you have physical deterioration of media, which can happen. Probably the worst offender here in our daily use is these pneumatics because the oxide will shed. Well, basically, all of this is plastic, right? So even the films are bits of plastic with something on. So in the film, it's got the layer of emulsion on there that's holding the image and the color and all that information. And on the video and audio, it's basically a piece of mylar or polyester with a thin piece of metal glued onto it. And that sometimes that glue dries up over time and the oxide will shed. And so there are some ways to deal with that. But it can be very different. We're just doing, for Northfield Rural right now, we're doing the DVC Pro digital format. Those things are sailing through, and those are from the 90s. Not bad, but they don't clog machines up the way that pneumatics do. So there's some formats and even some formulas, certain production runs that are better than others. Back when these were in mass production. Longer timeline. So if you choose to do it in-house, I mean, the argument for trying to find grants and larger grants to do in groups is that you get the material freed up sooner, if you can work with it. So you can get, you know, especially language, that's a pressure point for a lot of people. They're trying to get material released so it can be used for teaching young people the languages and preservation. So that can be a real pressure point for can we get this stuff faster rather than let's do it over the next 10 years. You know? Project quality. I think in this case, I'm describing the structure and the timing and the amount of attention and the amount of staff labor there is, because it's not just always send it out the door and it goes away. There's communication going on all the time. Sometimes about, we found this, what about this? How did you want to handle this? So there needs to be enough staff focus that somebody is educated on the project enough to give the labs direction, you know, or to run the transfer process. And in urgency, this would be, you know, the recording formats just not being playable. And this is an important one. I'm actually working with he was my mentor in college, but the fellow who produced the J. Hammond's Alaska series. And he's doing a whole upgrade to he's going to full 1080 on that. And they look fabulous. And he's really a stickler for detail. And I'm like, Richard, the people who know about that, who want to see that, need to see it pretty soon. Because there's whole generations that don't even know what that is or what those shows were about. And it was J. Hammond going around interviewing Alaskans all over the state. And if you saw it in his broadcast days, it's of interest and you might want to see it again. And people might want to see it again, but the demand won't be there. It'll be much harder invitation to a whole new generations of folks to invite them into your content if they haven't seen it for a substantial amount of time. So there's an argument there for maintaining continuity across generations so that that's something that young people feel they grew up with, not something, I never heard of that, you know. So that's a cost of keeping it in a vault. These are basic things you may know about, but You gotta have something under physical control so it survives in a room with a locked door, hopefully a sign on it. Putting word archive on it helps if you're not in a formal museum. Proper conditions, I've got a note on these later, but they're not wildly different. And you can keep things in a single storage room at a compromised temperature and humidity if you have to for a while. And plus disaster minimization, is it fire? Is it, what would that be? There's all across Alaska, people are doing these at all vastly different levels. Some people have millions of dollars on filtration systems and all this kind of things. And other folks are, a log cabin with a box in the corner. And it's whatever you can do. If you can keep the material to survive another day, hopefully increase the likelihood that it's going to make it into the future. So organizing data, creating finding aids. Where are these things? Who knows they exist? How are they marked? Are they numbered? And how does anybody, what's the succession plan if I go away? Because I'm the only one who knows about it. And if I just disappear and don't come in there tomorrow, does anybody know we have this? Is there any kind of a registrar process, or, does the executive director realize we have a film collection, that kind of thing? And it's funny because, we can be all passionate, but sometimes we're the rarity. And sometimes there's not an institutional passion for these things. Intellectual control, pretty aware of catalog records, most of us. Unique identifiers, we would call it a UMID for unique media identifier. Doesn't need to be anything usually more fancy than a 4 or 5 digit number. Just so that everybody knows what that is. And in our world, that tracks throughout our digitization process. It goes on the files and all through the process. And so it's a reference that means this is the content that came from this unique asset. And then organizing your records. It's a huge topic for another day, but putting all that information into a way that you can cross-reference it and reach it and query that information. Cataloging. Here's the unit in place. This is part of the KYUK thing we're doing. This is looks like an 8-track. It essentially is called a cart, but they used to do them for quick IDs for television and radio. They would have record like a 10-second. They're watching KYUK, and then somebody would, the operator would just hit a button, put a slide up, hit the button, and then when that was over, they would put up the next or video or go live to something. So they have a bunch of these in their collection, and we barcode them, and that barcode is something that we can read with our system. So when we're moving things around, shipping them in and out, if we need to, that's avoids the human error of typing those numbers out and the drudgery, but mostly the error, because we're all human. And we've done 25,000 piece slide scanning jobs. I tell you, people make mistakes, the best intention. It's fatiguing to do, if you're doing large numbers, barcoding is a real help. So this is about file quality. So I'm just going to suggest that when we're here, we're talking about, this is the thing that would survive into the future. Okay, we've got a preservation quality file that we made from all this stuff. That's the most important one. It's the highest scanning level, and frequently it's the hardest to play because it's a lot of large data rates, not something you're normally going to play on a regular computer, not intended for that purpose. It's meant to have the best quality. And then you compress and create other files from that are useful for other things, like we would say access, or a mezzanine is usually something that's a quality between preservation and access, and that's usually an editing file that somebody would use. So like ProRes, or Avid or something like that, depending on what your institution is using for editing and production. A lot of people will just use for access, they'll only make an MP4, which is another thing, but it's highly compressed. And it's meant to go on the internet and it's meant to be used on laptops and things like that. And so if it won't play your preservation file, you give them your access file. In that organization, if you standardize that, then it takes a lot of the thinking out of accessing the materials because everything's the same at these levels. That's what a lot of folks would aim for. So if you want to boil all that down, basically, if you've got film, you're going to, for most people, most often, you're going to do a digital scan of the film. Probably if it's 8 or 16 millimeter, it'll be 2K scan or overscan, which is just a little bit wider than the frame. And you would save those files as DPX probably. And some folks will print that back to fresh polyester film. That's basically the two things that are done in preservation with film. And there's some nuance to that, but that's the basic simplicity of it. With audio and video tapes, it's almost all digital, and almost all of it is file-based, and a few folks that we work with will still print back to gold CD media. And we dump almost everything out to LTO, which is linear tape open. So it's a format for enterprise class data backup, basically. And that takes into account, I mean, for instance, like I mentioned yesterday, I think we had one delivery for one part of one project was 65 terabytes, and that's not something people can host on a server and be likely to still be there in 2 or 3 years, as the machinery and hardware is so expensive, it needs to be replaced. And is there an IT specialist to supervise that? Usually not. So we put the preservation files off onto LTO, and those are magnetic tape on plastic like this, but a very robust formulation and data tracking. The tracking on this reads very well over time, and it's in wide use across America, massively. So all the biggest companies you can think of are using this all over. So this is the safest thing that we've come up with for a lot of archives. And this is what a delivery would look like. And here's the gold media. So, on a hard drive, you can give somebody a hard drive, but those things may not spin up. They're not designed for long-term storage. They're not designed to be in your on your shelf for 2 or 3 minutes. Check. Okay. So what's it going to be on? So generally, we give a hard drive to somebody who has their access files on it. Some folks want their preservation files, usually WAV file format files, to go to gold media, optical. Advantage of optical, these are magnetic. Hard drives are magnetic. That laptop is magnetic. What happens if there's some kind of a pulse? What happens if there's a massive solar thing, instance that we haven't heard of yet? And data can be disrupted, and magnetism, can be demagnetized. So we could lose a massive amount of data. And optical is digital, but it's pitted with a laser. It's physical. So this would not be erased by a magnetic event, whereas this would be. So it's all about how deep you want to go. There are some folks that take films and they will scan them to digital, and they will write them back to polyester and print them out and put those cans on the shelf. And they, if they can afford to do it, they'll do it. Not everybody can do that. So you got to pick what's most likely and what's what's likely to happen. We haven't had a huge demagnetization event, but there's folks in the world who would think that was a good way to attack, and might choose to use that. So it doesn't keep me from sleeping, but it is a possibility. It's something to think.
A few years ago, when I was in the process of digitizing about, 130 years family photographs, trying to look for permanent storage. Right now, they are on 2 computers and 3 backups. It's about 4,800 images. But talking with a friend of mine, and there was another medium of storage, which was glass. Now, have you encountered that? As
There have been,
as a parallel to the gold.
there have been some things. I'm not sure exactly what's being described there. when you say
It's
black.
coming out of Germany.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that have come and gone that never really got. So part of our thinking here when we're choosing a storage medium is penetration in the market. Because you don't want to be creating, you want to put your stuff on a version of this where there's like 5 folks that can read it. Even if it's great, and we all want those things to succeed, if they are the right thing. And I remember hearing a thing about data, it was called Data Brick back in the 90s, first heard of it, and they were gonna address it with lasers in 3 directions at once. They'd be able to write into the middle of this block of lucite or something. Great, okay,
Who's your audience?
so where is it? Well, and no, if it works, but as an archivist, we can't say, we're gonna do this thing way out here on the cutting edge. We need to wait until it's safely adopted because archives do not have enough buying power to force a market to continue for these things. We need to be somewhere where everybody else is, and that's when you come to something like this where all the IT departments at Hewlett Packard, all these guys are, using these things. It's like, that's where we want to be, someplace where there's constant development, billions of tapes being created, that's a safe place for us because then we'll be able to be read. Yeah, so these are the things that we're thinking about. Basic stuff here, physical media, storing them, acid-free storage containers. The digital media is your new carrier for your content. Highest quality version you've got, usually not playable, then you've got the mezzanine. And these are going on to different things. Some people do have us write their access files onto LTO. Just remember that the hard drives are temporary and don't get comfortable with buying a portable model. Doesn't matter how cute it looks or how techno it looks. One day it's not going to fire up. So multiple, like we don't know locks, LOCKSS, lots of copies, keep stuff safe. So that's locks. So just remember that. It's like your 3 backups. Yes, and out of region if you can do it, at least geographically separated. We do that for a lot of folks. We have LTO tapes in our storage place in Anchorage, and then folks will have a set on site with them. And some people have a 3rd location, just in case. That, I didn't say this, but come back real quick. So this size, if this is, that's LTO 6, LTO 8s are 11 terabytes uncompressed, right? So that's a pretty good storage amount of stuff. That would be a lot of photos would be up there. But that's the thing, it doesn't have to take up a lot of space anymore. Look at these. So here's the quick idea here is, why would you downscale your preservation level TIFF file of an image, 5K on a long dimension, 125 megabyte file at 16-bit, probably a 24-bit. You don't want to use that in Photoshop. You'll be there all day. Literally. So for production use, you're going to want something much smaller. And if you're going to be emailing it, we probably need a much smaller file for that. So that's the argument there. Downscaling for use so that you don't drive your production people crazy by, here's your file. And this, I won't go into this because we're trying to keep this light here today, but this is what, when you choose something, this is what we do is interpret it to that and say, okay, so this is WAV file, very standard across all museums and archives, 96 or 48K, 24-bit. I'm just telling you, these are very standard. They don't have to look all this scary, but this is what you would have if you selected this 10-bit video capture, hopefully 48K audio if we can do it, PCM digital. These are just standards. And so when you pick something, that's the elaborate version, and hopefully somebody like us can be in between that, so you don't have to go there, but you can. Everybody can go there. It's just a matter of education and time. These are the quick bullet points of what people are doing mostly. Okay. Like I said, polyester stock for film, overscan DPX files for motion picture film, PCM wave, like I said, 25, 48 or 96K, uncompressed V210 and MOV, and there's other things going on here. And then capturing native born digital files in their native file format and just moving that into a file off of the tape. Because the tapes aren't going to be readable pretty soon. A file on a hard drive is going to be readable as far as we know. You know, we don't know when it'll stop being. Here's how people send stuff to us if they have a lot of stuff to do. So you might be familiar with this. You might have one tote or half a tote or 20 totes, but we move things around by air. A lot of times Gold Street if it's a regional hub, or sometimes we have to move things to labs outside of Alaska because somebody wants to do 600 pneumatic tapes. We don't have the capacity for that. At least we could do it, but it would take a long time. So doesn't make sense. But that's something that's always negotiated in advance. Nobody ever doesn't know their stuff is going out to a lab. It's all discussed in advance. But that's part of, if we're going to speed things up. We can do 20 formats or so in-house, including film, quarter-inch cassettes, micro cassettes, pneumatic, Betacam, ASP, DV, DVC Pro, DV Cam. Probably some others I'm forgetting, 8, Super 8, 16 film. Anyway, but there are some times when things have to go, and this is where making sure everything is being checked off. You know where it is. And this is what you hope for. You're going to store stuff cool and dry, acid-free containers. You can put your video and audio things in there. Quick cheat sheet about how they should be stored. Vertically flat temperatures. You'll notice there's some real overlap here between video and film. Film can be frozen, but not just thrown in the freezer. You have to prep it. But it's like entropy. Things are always decaying, including us. And they put me in a freezer, I'll stop decaying real fast. But for film, it really can handle that, where video can't because of the glue and audio. The glue holding on to the plastic doesn't like freezing. Just a quick look at our tech stack and our software that we're using. SQL for our database. These are just tools. Happy to tell you more about this anytime. But that we're, this is cutting edge for, the world in general. But, we're not behind by any stretch up here in Alaska. Using these things. There's not even a lot of people who are doing that. We just happen to be technically oriented. And we have top consultants that we use when we want to solve a technical problem to resolve something that we're doing. So inventory database that we use for our SQL database, when incoming tapes from clients, generate this for everything, put a UMID sticker on it with a barcode, generate some basic metadata about it, build up a database or work as it's going through our system. See our UMID stickers on there, I don't know if there is. Pardon me. It's one of our software tools we use. Another software tool that we use. We customize all the GUI here and coded all this ourselves up, but we use FFmpeg behind the scenes for doing all this vetting, transcoding. And things.
What's your program collection management? What you're using here?
This is our own in-house software. This is stuff that we created from that list of tools I showed you a minute ago. So we automated some of these processes that if machines can do it better, we do that. So the humans can do audio quality control and video quality control and spot the things that the computers aren't good at. But running checksums and that kind of thing and verifying file quality at the bit level, that's something a computer is much better than a human. spectrographs and waveforms. We automate that right out, so that comes along. So you can look at your file in a different way than listening to it. That's an audio file. But you can see the spectrum and everything in it. Just another side benefit that there's no effort required to do that. It's just a bit of coding that we put in and now those come out. We also started doing English transcriptions free. Basically, we just put Whisper into our system and so it's about a 90% accurate English transcription with anything that's in English. Sorry, there's not too many other options right now, but that's something that just comes out and we just spit it out raw. We don't edit it or anything, but it's a massive wall of text. That's great. I mean, when you think about how much time we spent transcribing English. Just basic things that a project can improve your world. I like the disaster prevention thing, just getting a second set of things somewhere else. Then you have to look at your camera and see, is my building burning down? What's going on there? And then these are the basic steps. Selecting what you want. Is it because of format obsolescence, or is there a content urgency, or both? Are we trying to get this data out, this information out? Estimate how much maximum content you have. 10 hours, 1,000 hours, what is it? What are we looking at? How can we get our brains around this? Create plans, preservation, disaster, and access if you don't have them. They can be simple, but it's good to have an idea. This is what we do if place catches on fire. This is what we do if somebody asks us for a copy of one of these films. What do we do? That's everybody should know that, and it should be not different depending on which person's at the building that day. Should be okay, somebody asked for this, we follow this procedure. Maybe we need to get approval somehow in the system. Maybe there's a charge, maybe not. So plans, preservation specifications, obvious. What are we making when we digitize? When we migrate our content? Is this going to be an in-house or an outsourced project for the technical side, the digitizing, the scanning, and all of that? How much of that do we want out of house? Then the general work, inventorying the material, assess the quality and the status of the tapes and things. Digitize, do the quality control, deliver the data. Move the preservation data to safe storage. Whatever you decide that is. And out of region backup if you can. Return the original media to physical storage. And then there's the endless work of cataloging. Cataloging is never finished. And then access and public engagement plan, or whatever your user base is. So, with that, I'll have a sip of water and take any questions you have.
If you're doing the project, let's say take KYK or the UIC project.
Mhm.
How much input are you getting from the customer in terms of existing inventories, impact spreaders? Do you get that kind of help or?
Yeah, usually with these, especially with larger collections, like the broadcast collection of QAK, they've had an in-house. They had a 5,000 record database that had been done in the 90s, so we had a good head start. Kind of information we're getting from our work adds to that because that wasn't part. There was almost all content related, but it was quality. It was in Dublin core. It was a good database, but we're up to 7,600 now. We get a lot of other stuff that comes in. In some cases, it'll be donated to an institution or an organization, and they'll pass it immediately on to us. So, and maybe it came from a family, and they know they want it all digitized and everything. But we'll get 2 boxes, and there'll be, spiders in there, and all kinds. I mean, it's been in somebody's cabin for the last 25 years. And that's fine. I mean, that's not, so we're giving it the first numbering and that kind of thing. And so we always talk to folks about what they want, what they expect, what they need. Do they have an existing catalog that we want our record? These new records that fit in. That's another thing.
Question, how do you work with, setting price?
Any price?
So like, how do you identify what it's gonna cost to do a certain amount?
So we started with tapes. And we realized real quick, that's dangerous. For us. And maybe you. Because the VHS is a good example. Now, the VHSs can be 5 minutes long, 10 minutes long, and you'll know that sometimes by looking at them and see a number, or you can tell, looking through the window, you know, how much tape there is on it. But if it's like this, like a standard VHS is like 2 hour long tape. But if it's extended play mode, that could be 6 hours. So you don't know, I don't know if there's gonna be 5 minutes of content and an hour and 15 minutes of blank, or if there's 2 hours on there, or if there's 6 hours. So if you just say, well, I'll do this for a certain amount of time, you're committing to a possible 6 hour capture time, 6 hour quality control inspection, data triples, you know, so that's why I was saying the maximum length. We either get that from you or we assess by looking at images. Because that's where a lot of it is per hour. So we now bill per hour capture. And that way you're not getting hit if it's blank. And we make decisions together about, okay, what do we do? Well, if it looks blank to us, a lot of people with audio, they'll have us fast forward every 2 minutes and play for 5 seconds. Don't hear anything? No, forward. Don't hear anything? Go forward.
And that's not something that you would submit to any current kind of computer analysis.
Well, the problem is, it needs to play back. You can't find it without running it across an audio head. If it's an audio tape, like a cassette, like we're talking about here, you could scan it, but it's still going across. So in some ways, it's easier for the lab to just record the whole thing and then give it to you. And you can decide, because you've got the file, you can look at that spectrograph I showed you and say, well, it's, you know, there's obvious content here, and then the rest of it is completely flat. That way, you, the curator, knows there's nothing on there. We didn't have to trust that Bob was paying attention when that was captured. And he told us it was blank, but what if he was distracted? Now you can see right on there. So it depends.
But again, that analysis is not something that you can submit to quote unquote a machine.
Once it's captured.
Yeah.
Sure, because, yeah, the computer could look
And
at
see
the
it.
file and
See
say,
it.
oh, this, you know, what, you have to decide what no content means. It's like, is it a,
Yeah.
how many decibels of the level are you gonna say is nothing? Sometimes you can hear people moving around in the house. A lot of times the stuff is recorded at home. They did an interview with Grandpa. And you can hear him, but you can hear people in the background doing stuff. And sometimes, and then it's quiet and you can hear somebody bouncing around in the background, maybe even talking, but it's really low level. Because it was set low because he's close to the microphone. But in the background, you can still make it out, you know? So I think of them as clues. I see something like that as a content clue, like, I'm gonna go listen to that before I decide it's no good, right? Because what, I don't know what you think is good. Maybe there's particular sounds that would illuminate radically your whole collection if they were the right ones. You know? And the problem is, I think when people give stuff to a lab and the lab says there's nothing on it, that's going down in the record, and a lot of people coming afterwards will assume that's absolutely true, even if the decision-making process of what is blank changes at the institution. You know, like, you see what I'm saying? Like, what is blank? Is it never recorded? Okay, that you can usually tell because it sounds that way. But if there's very low levels, I don't know.
Are you hiring? Are you looking to expand?
I am hiring, yes. Why don't you?
I have an apprentice that works with me, who's been doing the inventory of our database, and he's got pretty good at figuring out, like, this is this type of media, here's how I can transfer it, here's my interest level, and that's the coding, he kind of has that tech focused background, technical background, so I would love to put you in touch with.
That's who we're looking
I'm
for.
looking for an off ramp for him eventually when his terms and apprentice ends. And unless Bloomberg gets back to me, I won't have any money for him, I don't think, at this stage, but I can do that for you if you're looking to expand your team.
I'm sadly gonna look at a young guy who's been from St. Paul, who's absolutely loves this work, but he's got a physical problem. He's just got to live in another location, to not be in pain all the time. So we're gonna lose him in October, sadly. And so this is interesting. Yeah,
Are you here in Anchorage or are you?
I'm in Anchorage.
Yeah, he lives in Anchorage, so. Yeah, I would love to get you guys in touch, maybe that would work.
Yeah, you never know. But if people are inherently interested in this kind of thing, I'm always interested in, and we've done training. I showed some pictures yesterday. We had the guys from Utqiagvik come down, and it was basically their video guys, but don't have hands-on working with this stuff. Need to understand it because they're young and they didn't ever work with film, and they just missed a lot of this format stuff. And so it's good when you're managing a collection to have some connection to this stuff, because this is physical. Data is hard to fall in love with. I mean, you can love with the content, but the file, whereas people get, you do your tactile, right? Sometimes you can smell them, they have a physical presence and you can actually care about. Like, these are my favorite things sometimes. Because they just, as a museum object, they show their life and their experience. But Mount McKinley, real, whatever you want, something, Pathé film, safety film, it's not night film. Yeah, so I love the tangibility of this kind of thing. And yeah, if you know how to make a great file, you can be confident that people are gonna be able to see and hear this stuff go on. So,
You have a VHS and it's like a T120 or T30, but can you, and it's, you checked off SPA, could you assume that it's going to be 30 minutes if it's at T3?
what I would say is probably. Because we really don't know until we put it in. And again, labels lie, and sometimes just by accident, or sometimes the flurry of people working with stuff and they just, they know what it is. It's right there on the table. They know what's on it. They don't write it down. They don't make a label, and it just goes in a box. And then 20 years later, you guys are all right. So maybe. So we put things in, and that's when we know. And that's what, if things are off radically, then we get back to you and say, okay, this is different. It's not what we thought it was, or sometimes it's much less. People are always happy for that. But arguably not, because if you're looking for content, if you really want, elder stories, and there's fewer than you thought, it's not really a problem that if you have 6 or 8 hours instead of 1 hour. That's like, wow, great. You never know. It's really exciting sometimes to just find wonderful things in the content. So that's kind of what keeps us engaged. We're very technical, but we were learning Yupik in the summer because we were transferring so much stuff, and the guys were teaching each other with Yupik from the books that we're doing in instruction. This was Yupik language instruction in Yupik, late 80s, so.
Another question. So what are you doing about your equipment and like preparing for backup equipment when your equipment breaks or dies, and it's so hard to find these older players?
Yeah. Connections with other labs or refurbishers, which those are rare. We have an engineer, broadcast engineer, a long-time broadcast engineer, who works with us on keeping our equipment maintained. And we have 5 pallets of old broadcast gear in storage, because one day.
Yeah, sure, like you're shopping for these things, or when you see something, you
Most of that I got in one fell swoop, but I got probably a solid pallet of it. And some stuff I have just as like a museum. So I got cameras from the 70s, with a single tube in them that, nobody's gonna use ever again, but it's a museum object, and there's no museum for it yet, so I'm just gonna keep it until somebody appears, you know. But, yeah, so but that is something, if you're gonna do this work, there are labs that you can just send stuff to. But a lot of people aren't ready to be in between the lab. We're kind of in between the lab and the folks who don't know, so we can analyze and see, did the lab meet spec for the project? Or did they, you know, we can look at something and say, hey, go back and do this again. You know, you didn't do well enough on this. We can tell that the head got dirty and you didn't clean it, you know, and they'll, okay, well, do it again. So there's a place for us, but if you wanted to just send stuff to a lab and cross your fingers, you'd probably get an okay product, but you wouldn't have that sense of certainty. And I think that's partly what we're providing, if we're not doing it directly ourselves. We do ship. It's usually larger numbers, but we're trying to do as much in-house as we can because the shipping costs are up quite a bit in the last 3-4 years. And that's eating into people's budgets substantially. So we're trying to keep as much in state, and partly the risk, because, you know, if this is that's a problem. Until we get digitized, it's the only unique copy of whatever that is, you know, so you put it in FedEx. Right, and luckily we have good luck with that. And that's something we have to do, if we have to do, or it has to come to us. But once it's digitized, you can relax, ship it back 2 days instead of overnight, you know, that kind of thing. You know, you still need it and want it, but not quite as freaked out about it when you've got a digital copy. How are we doing for time?
About 7 minutes left.
7 minutes.
Yep.
Is there anything in chat?
Nope,
Okay,
I've asked 3 times. So.
all right. Anybody else? Question?
Oh, you were gonna talk about Dawson.
Dawson. Frozen time, yeah. Well, this is the great, I'll give you the condensed version, because I got a tickle going, it's just, I'm sorry, it's interrupting my sometimes. So we're all familiar with the gold rush. There's many gold rushes, right? So there was obviously the big one in the Klondike, lots of ones in Alaska. This one was not in Alaska, but a lot of people came through and up and turned it into Paris, basically, overnight. And it was there for 3 or 4 years. And of course, they needed films to watch. And so they had a film theater, all set. And this is general film processing in the day was they create a film, send a print to the theater, and then store it, because there wasn't any reason to ship it back. Nobody wanted to do anything with it, but they had copyright and they had, it was an asset. So they would stick it in a bank vault. And this is what they were doing in Dawson. So there was a bank. Pretty soon they had too many films in the bank vault. And they're like, well, what else can we do with this? And next door, there was like a sports facility, and it had a swimming pool. And so they ended up draining the swimming pool. They took all these films out of the bank, took them next door to the swimming pool. They put them all in the bottom of the swimming pool, filled it up with dirt. Later on, they made a hockey rink on top of that. Fast forward to 1972 or 3 or somewhere in there. And they're like, well, we're going to do something with this piece of land, you know, and a bulldozer comes in. Next thing you know, there's a reel of film spooling out all over the place. Like, what the heck? Did a little shoveling, called up Ottawa. You know, guys, you better come down here and take a look. You know, and so a couple of guys that I knew were the ones that went and figured out what to do with this cache of films from the early 1900s that have been sitting there, you know, pretty well preserved for all that time. And it was too much for the Canadians to do all at once, and there was a lot of American content in there. So they kind of split it up with the Library of Congress. And truckloads of this material went out, you know, with dust and rocks and everything. And they set up tents on site And there's a documentary beyond that one. There's another one that has some interviews and things in it that I've seen. I'm not sure I would point it at you, point you at. But it became this thing where all these amazing films were coming out of it. Now, it wasn't quite the holy grail that they kind of imagined it might be, where like every lost film was going to be found and that sort of a thing. But there were endless amounts of material that were just in fabulous condition. And I think if I'm not going to misremember this, any bad baseball fanatics in here? There was a famous rigged baseball game. I think it was the Black Sox. I think it was nicknamed the Black Sox thing, but it was a rigged baseball World Series game, I think. Anyway, there was a actual film reel of that game.
As far as I know, it's the
Only known copy. Yeah. So there were dozens and dozens of these kind of things that were found in that. And it's such a neat thing because it was the gold rush and you could just make sense. And one of the things that Bill reveals in the film is that they were taking them out to the middle of the Yukon River and dumping them in the river to get rid of them. So I've always been like, now,
Yeah.
the bottom of the river. That's gonna be a little harder to get at. But it's interesting. It makes me wonder what's around Alaska. Did we have any scenarios like that? Is there something in Nome we haven't found?
films, because Nolan had a movie theater. Did those films get shipped any other place?
Unknown, but probably not.
Probably not. Now, I know the things in Fairbanks, at least when I got here, they were still, you get the standard everyday B film or maybe an A film. And that got shipped, probably got shipped back to Seattle because it would typically come up the coast, Juneau, Anchorage, get to Fairbanks, and then Fairbanks would ship it back to the distributor and it would go some other place, but how many places in Alaska that had a movie theater? We're the end of the line.
Well, end of the line, and nobody wants to pay to send it back because there wasn't a secondary market for films. So not even real B movies. Everybody needed the next serial or the next installment of something. And that only came about later. And actually most of the Hollywood studios didn't do anything in film preservation until VHS market came along, home video, and they wanted content. And then suddenly fell in love with their old films and looked around to find prints and became champions of film preservation, all high-minded and noble, but they needed a commercial reason. Yes. Well,
The movie is such a great story, and I think we have shown, like you say, we got hold and showed it twice in advance of Yukon Quest, and probably the last time it's through.
it's called Dawson City Frozen Time, if you get it. It's got a fabulous soundtrack. It's really thoughtfully produced. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk anytime. I don't know if I ended on the right, there it was. So this is my email here and our website, and there's a contact form on the website if you want to reach me directly. Then, I was going to show, there's a format guide on the main page of our website in the upper right corner, if you see it, and it's pictures of different formats. So if you're trying to identify, do I have a digital Betacam or what do I have? There's examples there. And, but I always say, if you're confused at all or anything, just send me a picture and I'll tell you something what it is. I've got 45 years literally of handling this material, so I can usually tell what it is on site. All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man.